Welcome to Truth or Reps. So, I, like many others, feel sort of a pull to a fascination with. Oh, actually, I just thought of another one. A pull to a fascination with difficult works. I, like many others, look at a game like Dark Souls, and part of the attraction to me of that game is that it's known as a difficult game. However, here's the thing though. That's not the only game that I'm like that with. And Dark Souls, for its own thing, it has no difficulty selection. Or I mean, some people say, well, it's you make your own difficulty by, either playing with magic and just sort of standing back all the time, maybe, or doing this or that. Especially in a game like Elden Ring, where there are a lot of different options. But nevertheless, you play Dark Souls. It doesn't seem immediately apparent to me anyway, unless there's something I'm forgetting. In the Dark Souls games I've played, it seems like you just start the game. That's it. No difficulty selection. In in other games, though, I will tend to. For a while, I tended to pick hard, I guess. But recently, or I don't know, I don't know how often I've really picked hard, but like when I was a kid, I would like pick easy mode, and I remember one of my friends saying, or one of my friends, he was sort of more of an acquaintance, this kid, but when he was my friend's cousin, so one of my friend's cousin said like, we brought up like the new Tony Hawk game at that point, which was like Tony Hawk's American Wasteland, and he like I hadn't bought it, and I don't know if I had really consciously thought about like you know why I hadn't bought the new Tony Hawk game or something, because I had bought, or even Tony Hawk's Underground 2, because I had bought Tony Hawk's Underground, Tony Hawk 4, Tony Hawk 3, like I did Tony Hawk 2, I think Tony Hawk 1 as well. Like I literally bought like all the mainline Tony Hawk games. And then after a while I was just like, I just didn't keep buying them. I think partially for a while I was sort of like very reverent of review scores, and in certain places like I would read EGM, which was, as far as I saw, far and away the best video game magazine. PSN was cool, or PSM, I think. PSN is PlayStation Network. PSM, PlayStation Magazine, that was pretty cool. Nintendo Power, say what you will about it, it definitely had a lot of, you know, it Nintendo Power seemed to have a lot of care that went into it. Um, but EGM just and then there was like there was Game Informer. There was another one. Oh, Official PlayStation Magazine (OPM). They had the demo discs, which was really fucking cool. As long as you had the system they were talking about and like the version of it that, like, I think it might have transitioned to PlayStation 2 in the time that I knew OPM, but I think I might have like bought OPMs when it was giving out PlayStation 1 discs. And like if you had the right system or if you had a PlayStation 2, I think PSM might have given out PlayStation 2 discs or something. If you had the right system, it was like you were getting to play like free games, like or free parts of games. It was awesome. But I was very reverent to review scores anyway. Like it is what it is. I kind of like if Roger Ebert said like a movie was like 4 stars, like I guess I'd put a lot of stock into that. I guess maybe Roger Ebert was a little later than this, but it's like say EGM like gave something like a 9, a 9.5, and a 9 or an 8.5 or something. Like I would feel like a certain way about that game. And it's not that my feelings couldn't diverge from it, but nevertheless, like it was like, oh, like that's the official EGM score, or really like that's the official score as far as I thought about it. Um, but at the same time, I don't want to turn this into a moral relativism thing or a difficulty relativism thing, just a relativism thing in general, and say, like, oh, well, there are no objective measurements of how good a game is. It's like, to say that about video games, to say that about movies, to say that about books, or really to say that about almost anything, to me, like, it really grates on me, or like it's kind of just, there's a deep and I don't, I don't even know if it's a feeling thing so much as just sort of like as like almost a neutral, like conceptual thing. Like, that's not true. It's like a Stanley Kubrick movie. There's something about the Stanley Kubrick movie. Like, it is reaching a higher level of transcendence artistically. It is better, a greater art, a Stanley Kubrick movie than, like maybe a Steven Spielberg movie. And then Steven Spielberg, for whatever you might say about him, just like whatever you might say about anyone, I guess, famous enough to make movies. But Steven Spielberg, one of his movies is probably objectively better than like a Michael Bay movie. And then it's like, well, a Michael Bay movie, it's probably objectively better than one of those sort of like rehash. They had Scary Movie at first, and Scary Movie was really funny. It was like a spoof on like, it was set up as like a spoof on Scream, but it had a lot of other like Scary Movie elements in it, similar to Scream, I guess. So it kind of was like a parody of Scream, but it was like it was like a parody of Scream and like other horror movies. Just generally, it was a parody of horror movies and stuff. And then even Scary Movie 2. I remember my uncle drove me and my cousin out to see Scary Movie 2 somewhere in New York or something, and it was so funny. Like, it was shockingly funny, and like we laughed our asses off, and it was also sort of fun because it's like we were too young to see that movie. It was very R-rated, but I mean, like, not very, very R-rated, but it was pretty obscene. But then you had your not spin-offs, then you just had your movies doing the same thing, like date movie, epic movie. For a while it seemed like basically like they had just something and then movie. Like, Scary Movie came out, but then suddenly it was date movie, suddenly it was epic movie, whatever. And so objectively, in some sense, I think objectively, like a Michael Bay movie would be better than one of those movies. And then again, one of those movies might objectively be better than like one of these like, one of these like Mystery Science Theater movies or something, maybe. And then those might be objectively better than, but I'm not trying to say categories are objectively better. I'm trying to say, like, a Kubrick movie is objectively better than one of the, like, than date movie. It's like, a Stanley Kubrick movie is like a work of art. There may be artistic elements to date movie, I don't know. But here's the thing, like, a lot of people have a preamble to, like, lists, and their preamble is like, hey, this is just my opinion. There's no actual, like, real list for... one of the bad people with that is Happy Console Gamer. I like Happy Console Gamer, but, like, I realized kind of recently, like, just how heavily he emphasized that and just how frequently, and it's like, I'm not doing one of those. Like, this is just my list. This is just my opinion. Like, there is no real best video game of all time. There is no real best book of all time. There is no real, like, measurement or something along those lines. And it's like, no, that's bullshit. Just because you don't sense it, or just because maybe the technology doesn't exist to, like, measure, like, the spiritual vibration or something, that doesn't mean that to the discerning eye, to someone who actually, like, gets something out of, like, a Stanley Kubrick movie, like, aesthetically or spiritually or artistically, artistically or something, if you, like, truly, like, get the deep impact of, like, Eyes Wide Shut, for example, which people, like, kind of criticize as being, like, lesser Kubrick, and I don't know, maybe it is, but there is something so magic, and it might be like, well, Matt, now you seem like the Philistine, but there's something so magical about Eyes Wide Shut. Like, it is, there's something magical about, like, Tom Cruise in general, and in Eyes Wide, and I'm not saying I like Tom Cruise, like, in the sense of, like, that he's necessarily a good person or this or that or the other thing. I'm not making a statement about, like, Scientology is bad, Scientology is good, like, anything like that. I'm just saying Eyes Wide Shut has such an incredible atmosphere of just like it is. There's just spiritual oomph going through that movie. In that movie and in many others, you can find the same thing, and you can see like it basically to say there is no objective like measurement, that's to shit on all the stuff that's really good. And I'll say this right here, to say there is no objective measurement of like art, or there is no, or if not measurement, because that might imply that you have like the measurement like worked out, to say there is no objective measure maybe, or let's just be real, to say there is no objective quality in art and that you couldn't like sense a much higher quality coming from one movie than another movie, it's totally bullshit. And beyond being bullshit, and it also seems like kind of a thing where like somebody who doesn't see the value in something would just sort of say that to explain their position when they haven't actually like discovered what anyone's even fucking talking about yet with like what is good artistic beauty. But in any case, these people saying that, they're essentially saying all movies are equally valuable, and there's nothing special at all about fucking Stanley Kubrick. There's nothing special at all about fucking like Quentin Tarantino on a good day. There's nothing special at all about fucking Ernest Hemingway. There's nothing special at all about William Faulkner. There's nothing special at all about T.S. Eliot. It's like, no, fuck you. There is something special in many of the works by many of those people. There is something real. There is something powerful. And I would question your sense of spirituality at all if you just said like, no, it's nothing. Like, well, A, because it seems like you're either mistaken or you're being dishonest, and either way, that doesn't seem to be boding well for, just your sense of these things in the first place. Anyway, I had a friend who had a cousin who said that the Tony Hawk, I think American Wasteland game, whatever the newer one was, maybe at that point it was American Wasteland 2 or something, I don't know. But whatever it was, I had a friend whose cousin said that game, like somebody mentioned the new Tony Hawk game, maybe I did, I don't know, but I didn't have it, so it's not like I was like spending a lot of time with it or thinking about it that much, but I guess I thought about it a little bit. And anyway, in this situation, the kid, he said something like, it is not a good game because it's too easy. And like it was like freaking seventh grade or something, whenever it was, when that kid was saying that about whatever particular Tony Hawk game it was. And it really struck me off guard, and I didn't say anything about it, but I remember like thinking something like this maybe. It is a bad thing in your estimation for a game to be easy. Like I was standing there and it was like, why would a game being easy be bad? Like why would you want a game to be hard? It's fun when a game is easy because you want to do well in the game. Like a game is like I'd prefer a game to be as easy as possible. Like you play on easy mode. Like it's just fun. And but then I totally shifted over into like playing harder mode and stuff like that. Guitar Hero went into it, like getting good at Guitar Hero and stuff. But in any case, like there was a time where I didn't sort of feel the allure of evil. I thought to say I didn't feel the allure of difficulty, but now I do get it. And I think it might have been a valid thing to say, the allure of evil. I mean, what is like looking for difficult things other than like looking for conflict or something? Like it seems like kind of a dark or sort of inverted thing. And Jesus said something about like, be ye as little children or you will not enter the kingdom of heaven or something. Well, what do kids don't want something that's going to be tough. Like kids don't want something that's difficult. I mean, maybe some kids do, but I think generally if you were to ask a kid like, do you want to play a hard game, a game that's medium hard, or however you would say it so that they would understand it depending on how old they are, medium difficulty, well, yeah, I guess they might understand that, but do you want to play a hard game, a medium game, or an easy game? I think most kids would say easy game. Like, why would they? Maybe there'd be like some kind of kid with like a little bit of a sneer. One of my friends was sort of like that, and I thought he was like really freaking cool. Or in a certain sense, like I kind of looked up to him, and he was this sort of he had a bit more edge to his personality, let's say, or just like a little bit. And I guess I might have been edgier than I thought anyway. But he was sort of like a Calvin and Hobbes, like Calvin kind of sneer kind of character there. And but it's like I think most kids would say I want to play on easy mode. So maybe there is something about like, oh, why would I go out looking for trouble? Like I just want to have an easy time. I just want to have fun, But still, it extends to books, and sometimes a book is kind of on easy mode. Um, do I have anything in arm's reach that would be more easy mode? I just have all these books that are like so difficult, I don't know. I guess like I wouldn't call this like easy mode, but like a Witcher novel, and it's like the translated version. I don't know how different the translation is from the original. Maybe the original I would call a hard mode, or like I'd just say is a totally different book. But the Witcher translations, I'd say it's like getting back closer to easy mode. Maybe I don't want to say easy mode, but it's like it's not like super intimidating necessarily. But then you have something more like The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. This isn't super intimidating either. It's fairly readable. I mean, I have the book The Stranger by Albert Camus over there. I think it's the Matthew Ward translation, unless that's like a Dao De Zing translation. Because there was a that was something Matthew C. I don't know, John C. Riley translation of the Dao De Jing, but The Stranger, at least the translation I read of Camus' like famous existentialist novel, or he probably wouldn't have called it existentialist, or at some point I think he would have differed with that. But the famous novel by Camus, that's pretty easy to read and get through. And here you go, actually, the two existentialism guys. I even got through Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre fairly easily as well. That's his like famous existentialism novel, or existentialist novel. I think maybe in some senses more highly regarded and more up there than The Stranger, but then The Stranger does seem to be sort of more popular and sort of more like a crowd pleaser kind of thing book. But The Stranger, The Stranger is actually very readable. I'd say it's so readable that it almost feels like young adult or something. Like I read it in high school, but it's so readable that it almost feels like it's meant for younger. I mean, it's similar to George Orwell's Animal Farm as opposed to 1984. Animal Farm, I think, was written like as more of a book for like younger ages, but like it's similar message to like his other stuff, and it is like pretty deep and it's awesome. I'd say The Stranger's similar to that. Like I think it's a little more like higher age level maybe than Animal Farm, but it's so readable. It's actually so readable that it almost makes itself look bad because it feels like it's just sort of another easy book. In fact, I would say I blew through The Stranger pretty easily. I'm not having as easy a time just like blowing through books these days anyway, but like I blew through The Stranger very easily, and The Witcher, it's been like The Last Wish rather there. It has been a slog for me. But, you know, The Stranger, that's on a certain difficulty level. A little higher in difficulty, The Myth of Sisyphus, or at least a little drier. Like this is actually an essay, and then I guess other essays. But the book is titled after, The Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays. The main essay is The Myth of Sisyphus. That's the essay that Camus has about Basically to be or not to be, like the essay about he presents it as like the main philosophical question, or really like the only philosophical question until you get past it anyway, maybe, or something like that, like whether to live or not. That's a big one. That's a real big one. But this is a little more difficult, and I'd say probably this is a little more elementary than Nausea by Sartre. But I blew through Nausea too. It was just sort of, I was just blowing through books back then, or at least more so than I am now. But here's a video about the 10 difficult books that I'd like to read. And maybe in parentheses something like, and they are worth reading, or something to sort of like go against the whole bullshit of like, you don't have to read these books. There is really no measure of difficulty in a book. There is no measure of quality in a book. All books are the same. Any book by James Patterson is just as good as any book by Ernest Hemingway. And you know what, guys? It's actually better because the Ernest Hemingway books are really snobby. So it's actually like way better than that shit by Ernest. Like I don't want to do that shit, and so maybe I'll have something in the parentheses, not, and it's okay if you don't read them or something like that. Instead, I'll have one saying like, and you're an idiot if you don't read these books. I don't know. Like I haven't read these books yet, but okay. Although I thought of one. You know what? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do an honorable mention here. My honorable mention, and it's an honorable mention because I've read it before, but it's one of those books similar to like the Fellowship of the Ring and actually the Two Towers and whatever, and like much of the part of the Return of the King that I read. It's one of those books that feels like, I probably missed a lot of it just like pushing through it faster than I should. So like it doesn't really feel like I've read The Lord of the Rings as much as I actually have, to the point where like I pulled this out the other day, and like I want to read The Lord of the Rings again and actually finish it, rather than reading part of it and not finishing it, getting into Return of the King again. But again, meaning I said it again. I've only gotten that far once, although it was over a period of years. But in any case, I took this book out. I took it off the shelf because I'm approaching it. At some point, I hope to approach it like I'm reading it for the first time, which in a certain sense I am. And so, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian or The Evening Redness in the West, it's a very dense book. Super dense. It's like the Bible. Like it's not, maybe not in certain ways, but it's like I've read a decent little bit of the King James Bible, or not a decent little bit. I've read like Genesis, Exodus, and a little into the next one, but it's pretty dense. It's very like archaic or arcane. It feels arcane, really. It's very it feels profound. It feels, it's a great book, but essentially, I think I wasn't. I don't think I was like connecting with it enough while I was reading it to say that I actually like read it. Like I look back and it's just like mostly blank, but well, maybe not mostly, but it's sort of like a low roar, but it's a great fucking book. And I'll read you a little bit from each of these. I'll read you the first sentence of each of these. Yeah, let's see how long or short this is. Okay. Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West by Cormac McCarthy. See the child. That's the first sentence. See the child. Okay. That's an honorable mention because it's a pretty fucking difficult book. Although, the guy in Right Conscious says, well, all the Blood Meridian bros, I guess there might be kind of Blood Meridian bros, like sort of in the James Franco sense, but I don't know how much of a bro you are if you're actually reading Blood Meridian. Like that's a pretty like that's not a book that like 90% of people are gonna want to pick up like at all. So the Blood Meridian bros, it's like I don't know if bro has a different connotation to you, but to me it seems to mean like someone who's like not that sophisticated, someone who's not that intellectual or whatever. And it's like, I don't know, Blood Meridian, that's a pretty deep book. But okay, let's keep going. This, I'm not numbering these. I'm not numbering these, but let's just count the number I'm at in terms of like counting down to the last one. So this is 10. Being in Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre. Or Sartre, or Sartre, however you say it. I have an easier time saying Nietzsche. Okay, this guy was an existentialist philosopher. People say Camus of Myth of Sisyphus and the Stranger and the Plague and other things. The Fall, I think there was... Anyway, Camus can do, but Sartre is smarter. I don't even know if they pronounce Sartre correctly in that phrase, but I mean, let's just say Camus has some like I had a book by him called Resistance, Rebellion, and Death. I don't know if I still have it. I had a book called The Rebel by him. I ended up like either throwing it out or losing track of it at some point, so I bought it I bought The Rebel again. Camus has some books. But he doesn't have a book like this, as far as I know. Like, he doesn't have a book that's like this. This is only like 800 pages, but it looks like way thicker, and it feels like a thicker proposition. Yes, I have my initials on it because this was actually one of the books I had sent in to me in jail. So that was, that was cool to get it, but it was like, there was no way I was probably going to finish this in jail. I was pretty close to leaving at that point anyway, but, this is like the text by like one of the existentialism guys about like life, So I guess this is like one of the foundational existentialism things, and I think existentialism is kind of cool. I probably differ politically with these guys severely, but I think, existentialism is kind of cool, and like this guy, like to look at the book, like it's just you open up a page and it's just like him, like it sounds like him like talking to a college classroom, or like more sophisticated than that. It sounds, furthermore, this being need not be conceived as present to consciousness with only the abstract characteristics which our study has established. Stuff like that, it's like, that's the book for like 800 pages, and it's like, for someone who's having like trouble getting through books these days, I'd really like to read this, and I hope to. But in any case, let's do the first sentence of this, I guess from the introduction, if we consider that the beginning of this. Modern thought has realized considerable progress by reducing the existent to the series of appearances which manifest it. Okay. Might want to read that again, think about it, but essentially like saying like all that is what appears to us or something like that. But this is a thick book, so that's number 10 that we'll be counting down from here. Now let's move over in the philosophy corner, because there is another philosophy book here, to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I think sometimes it's called Thus Spake Zarathustra, but this Penguin Classics edition, it's Thus Spoke. From what I've read of it so far, I like the translation. It's pretty good. But it's a slog. It's probably not as much of a slog as at least a little bit of Being in Nothingness is going to be until I maybe get into it. But if I read it, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, it's a slog. It's still a slog. It's more of like a parabolic slog, or like not parabola, but a parable. Like it's a parable slog. It's like it is a parable. It's a philosophy book, but it's presented as like a fiction parable, similar to like a book like The Alchemist, maybe, or something. But like not. I don't want to like say I don't want to say yay or nay on The Alchemist, but like it's definitely like not like The Alchemist, but it's a similar enough setup of like exploring ideas through a narrative. But I guess it's more like I was gonna say it's more like the Bible. Like in terms of like it's more like the New Testament where there's this figure named Zarathustra and he's walking around and he's like making proclamations and giving speeches and stuff. And so far like it seems like he's saying a lot more than Jesus is quoted to say in the New Testament in terms of the amount of like words he uses. But it does seem like kind of interesting because Friedrich Nietzsche is the God is dead guy. He's the guy who has a book called I think called The Antichrist. Like he's a guy who's he's not a big guy that Christians would probably feel was super great to be looking into, and this seems like sort of an inversion of the Christ story in some sense. Just this guy going up to a mountain, coming down the mountain, and like making proclamations to like townspeople as like they mill around and do things. It almost has the atmosphere of like a Dark Souls, actually, in terms of it's like he's walking through this unforgiving world and like, but instead of the NPCs saying like interesting things, although they do too, it's his character. It's he as the main character saying interesting things as he like meets NPCs or meets other characters, but relating to Dark Souls as he meets characters in this unforgiving world. And he says a lot of interesting things, and I like the idea of like the Ubermensch, like of course it does really connect well with transhumanism, but in terms of like, oh yeah, of course, Nietzsche would be really popular these days, even if it is in the more countercultural or like right wing people. And of course, Nietzsche would be more popular because of the transhumanism stuff. And who's talking about the Ubermensch? Well, it seems like people like Yuval Noah Harari might be the people likely to. Well, I don't know if he's a transhumanism guy, but whoever like would be like who you'd point to and say like, well, that guy seems like a real stooge for the fucking like control system or something. That person would be like probably talking about something similar to the Ubermensch, except they'd say in more of a technological Ubermensch or something like Aldous Huxley. As pronounced by Alan Watt, would probably be talking about like an Ubermensch type character. So it's no surprise that Nietzsche becomes more popular these days. And interestingly enough, Nietzsche said like, I'm a philosopher who is for a future generation than my own. Maybe he's the one for this generation, because it seems like a lot of people are looking into him. But nevertheless, like, as Michael Sugrue said, R.I.P. recently. God, that's. I discovered that guy, and he has some really, really good frickin' videos. But as Dr. Michael Sugrue said, Nietzsche, like, basically, he'll do more in one sentence. This is, other people have said this, but, like, Nietzsche will do more in one sentence than other people will do in, like, in whole books or something like that. Or I think maybe Nietzsche said that about himself or something, and people quote that about him. But Sugrue pointed to a line where Nietzsche, he's pointed to this line as like being an example of Nietzsche like totally destroying like the entire enterprise of theology in like one sentence. Nietzsche destroys theology, but really, like he pointed this out, and it's like Nietzsche said something like, if you take all of the accumulated like writings of all of theology, it's all at the end of the day, like all you have is something that's not even superficial. Oh my God. Not even at the end of the day, like something along these lines. I probably totally fucked up the quote, but something along these lines of the entirety of theology at the end of the day is not even superficial. Is just something that's not even superficial. Like essentially all of like religion, all of this, all of that. And I'm not saying this because I think there are a lot of ways that you can see what religion is saying for yourself and like can verify its operations for yourself, or its validity or whatever. But essentially like pointing to all of religion and sort of giving like the ultimate like preteen like atheist response. That stuff isn't even superficial. Basically, like it, or I think the quote was something more along the lines of, all of these theologians seem to think they're so deep, but in reality, they're not even superficial. Something much closer to that, where it's these people think they're so deep, but at the end of the day, they're not even talking about things superficially. They're just totally whole cloth making things up. And they're not even touching on the superficial world, much less anything deeper than that. They haven't even gotten to the point of superficiality because they haven't even like gotten that far towards like something that's even accurate. But you know, like that's like one sentence that like really fucks with like a lot of theology. And I'm not saying that sentence is true, but I am saying that that sentence has a real oomph to it and a real sense of like, oh wow, like I'd like to think that one over and make sure that I'm not carrying too many presuppositions into this arena. But okay, so let's speaketh like Zarathustra, the beginning of thus spoke Zarathustra. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lang. Let's start over again. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home and went into the mountains. Okay, so there you go. It is a book of philosophy, but it is a book of philosophy told sort of like the New Testament. And he's leaving his home at the age of 30 years old. Didn't Jesus start teaching at the age of 30 years old? It seems like there's some kind of like symbolic parallel there that perhaps intentionally Nietzsche was working in, but it seems fairly symbolic there. Okay. Next one. This is going to start The Obvious Kids Club, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Oh wow, Matt, you're picking the book that has like 40 pages of footnotes or endnotes rather, and probably more than 40 pages of endnotes. You're picking the book that has like hundreds of pages of endnotes, and like a really long meandering book that like is famously difficult, and like it's the famously postmodern hipster book to pick as a difficult book that you'd like to read. And there was some girl who said in some really cool way, oh, you know, all the boys I know have Infinite Jest unread on their bookshelf or something like that. You know, it's like, okay, well, you're going to really pick that book? And it's like, yeah, I am really going to pick that book because Infinite Jest, from what I've read of it, and I've gotten to page 79. By the way, let's see. Thus spoke Zarathustra. How far have I gotten bookmark-wise? 44, page 44. 79 for at least here in Infinite Jest, but I think I might have gotten a little farther before I went to jail. And then Being in Nothingness, I don't even think I like. Essentially, like, I think I read a little of the introduction, but I don't even think I really read anything into it. Okay. But now, Infinite Jest. So currently, at least I have bookmarked 78 or 79. Infinite Jest is one of the most incredible books I've read even a part of. There's a scene where it's like this famous Super Bowl player, this famous football player who's like, he's in a motel, like he lives in a motel or something, but he's like a famous football player, or maybe he's a college football player, I don't know, but he's famous or something, and he plays football, and like he has these like, he has like roaches in his motel room, so he has these little traps where it's like a little dome or something, and the roach like goes in there, and then it closes, and then it like poisons the roach, and the roach like is floating in it or something. Like whatever it was, like it was such a beautiful image, like such a horrible, ghastly but beautiful, odd, eerie kind of whatever thing that it was really magnificent. And this book is really great. And from what I've read of it, I mean, it's phenomenal. David Foster Wallace is phenomenal. He was way too libby for his own good, but, you know, whether he knows it or not, he wrote the ultimate pro-life essay in the essay Consider the Lobster, where he's talking about, well, what if, don't you just, if you're not, basically in the essay Consider the Lobster, he says, if you do eat lobster, then you pretending or you taking the position that the lobsters don't feel pain as they're boiled alive sounds kind of convenient for you, right? And I'm not here to make any judgments about you. And that's actually the annoyingness coming in, like, oh, David Foster Wallace, he's so above it all. He's so non-judgmental. He's not going to make judgments about you, which sort of sounds like he's a moral relativist, but nevertheless, he's actually saying something good here, like intellectually, and, say what you will about David Foster Wallace, like he said some interesting things. Go watch the movie The End of the Tour. You'll cry, it's so beautiful. Starring frickin', what's his name? Big guy from, not Knocked Up. Oh, yeah, Knocked Up, right? Anyway, Jason Segel. But David Foster Wallace... Oh, yeah. So David Foster Wallace basically said in Consider the Lobster, he said, hey, look, if some people say that the lobsters don't feel pain and that they're not like neurologically advanced enough to feel pain. And then some people say that the lobsters do feel pain, and they point to things like the lobsters seeming to try to get out of boiling pots of water and like try to literally knock the lids off of boiling pots of water to get out of there. And seeming to make like noises in there or something. I think they might have maybe they didn't make noise, but the noise of like the pot lid banging as the thing tried to get out of the boiling water. I mean, some people point to that and say it does seem like it's in pain, and then other people say, well, no, it's actually not in pain. In pain it might look, but that's just us anthropomorphizing it or something like that, or like it's not neurologically advanced, it's not in pain or something. And so he's like, he says, he sort of ends the essay by saying, and spoiler alert for the essay, but it's really good. I listened to it on YouTube, but then I did buy the audiobook. So, but at the end, he basically ends the essay by saying, look, if you're in favor of eating lobsters, and you also are one of these people who say that the lobsters feel no pain, then I would just pose the question to you that might it be that you don't want to actually accurately assess the information at hand or just your intuitions about something when you're saying, I take the position that they don't feel pain, perhaps because you just really enjoy eating the lobsters. And it's the exact same argument with the killing of unborn children. Oh, you say that they're not actual people? You say that they're not actually in pain? You say that the images on those ultrasounds like don't fucking exist, I guess? Or you say that it's not the baby's like screaming in pain in the ultrasound as they pull its little body parts off? You say that it's not actually in pain? Oh, well, I would just pose the question to you. Maybe something's a little too convenient for you to acknowledge the possibility of someone else being in fucking pain. Anyway, David Foster Wallace specifically elsewhere in the collection Consider the Lobster talks about the actual, like, talks specifically about, actually interestingly enough in an essay about, like, subjectivism in grammar, or descriptivism versus prescriptivism, rather, which is similar to really subjective, or rather objectivism versus subjectivism, not the Ayn Rand objectivism, but just sort of the general polarity there. But he says something specifically about abortion in this objectivism versus prescriptivism essay about grammatical usage and stuff. He says, like, well, look, he says, the only sane viewpoint I could see with the abortion issue is to say that it's a horrible thing, and also to say that I have, or rather, no, even more specific than that, and actually pretty close to my argument about what his argument could say about the same situation with abortion as it does about lobsters in the essay Consider the Lobster. He said, basically, the only sane point of view that I would have is if there's any question that this is a real person that we're killing, then we should always err on the side of not killing them. But then he also said, and he brought in the evil liberal point of view here, he said, but at the same time, I have the ultimate liberal position of saying I can't tell somebody else what to do Like, I don't want to tell somebody else what to do. I don't think he went so far as to use the slogan with her body, but he definitely, I don't. He said something like, "I think we should err on the side of not killing. If we're not sure if this is a real person in there, we should err on the side of not killing them." But then he also said, "I don't want to tell anyone what to do," in so many words, and it's like, well, David Foster Wallace, if you were sitting there and you were like an anarchist and you were all about a stateless society and you were sitting there saying the entire government is unjust and nobody should be imposing rules on anybody over anything, then I would understand that this would be consistent with that. But if you're sitting there saying everything else generally in terms of like the system of government that we live in is sort of at least somewhat defensible, but about this one issue of like possibly killing someone, even you say possibly killing someone, I would say actually killing someone, but even you say it's so much possibly killing someone that we should never do it, or that we should err on the side of not doing it or something, you would then turn around and say, but I can't tell anyone what to do. It's like, okay, then how would you tell anyone what to do with speeding tickets? How would you tell anyone what to do with going to jail for a Ponzi scheme? How would you tell anyone what to do with going to jail for like homicide or going to jail for armed robbery? Like, if you're sitting there saying, I won't tell anyone what to do about killing a person in this situation or possibly killing a person in this situation, then how could you possibly say that you would tell anyone else what to do about anything? However, David Foster Wallace at least got that far in his thinking and was at least honest enough and authentic enough and deeply thinking enough to say, like, no, I'm actually going to look at this issue, and it's like, no, we actually should err on the side of not killing people, and it's not even erring on the side. Like, just go look at a fucking ultrasound. I wish David Foster Wallace were alive right now, because I'd tell him, just go look at a fucking ultrasound, David, and tell me if we're erring on the side of anything, or if it's actually just, in fact, a real person in there who's actually alive and who's actually going to go through agonizing torture if that happens to them. Now, anyway, despite how I differ with him, I think that he's a great thinker, and I think that he is really honest about a lot of things. And I think that for an author to get this big, of course, there might have been some control system handiwork, even if it's just the control system approving of him. But in any case, Infinite Jest appears to me to be a masterwork, similar to Blood Meridian, but in sort of a different way. That sounds sort of cheap, but really it does seem like this is similar enough to Blood Meridian in just sort of a different way. And you might say, well, Matt, weren't you saying that objectively things were aesthetically superior or inferior before? And I would say yes, and actually I think perhaps this seems objectively comparable to Blood Meridian in an aesthetic viewpoint, but it gets to that aesthetic in different ways. And you might say, well, Matt, that sounds pretty subjective. And it's like, no, like if two boats were having a race, it's like one boat might be going really fast because it has a fast engine, and another boat might be going really fast because it's like somehow it's being pulled by something else, and somehow that wasn't against the rules. Or it was just moving in a different way. But like they were reaching the same destination, and the destination is the level of like aesthetic, like beauty or like spiritual power or something. And even if they are like wildly different in terms of that metric, then there are other metrics that you could look at things at in more or less an objective way, I would say, or at least a more objective way than these crazy assholes making other YouTube videos would say. And I love a lot of those guys, but nevertheless, like, it's like, no, that's bullshit. Don't undercut your whole theme here in this whole video by saying that ultimately there is no difference between any video game ever. It's like, no, some video games are better. Final Fantasy VII is better than fucking Final Fantasy VII is better than fucking like Dot Hack on PS2. And Dot Hack is a pretty fun fucking RPG, and I mean, I don't know, maybe I'd have to play Dot Hack again. Maybe Dot Hack is like really good, but let's just say, like, I don't know. There is an objective measure, like Virtua Fighter 4 is an objectively really, really good fighting game. But see, with video games, it is tough, and I will say that Roger Ebert does if you hate him for it, still read Roger Ebert's essay about how video games are not art, because he makes some interesting points. And it may be my struggle to like relate different games. Maybe it's just because I haven't finished as many games relatively, because it's a big time investment. But and maybe it's also because like the only games I play tend to be ones that people say are really good because it is such a big time investment. But that's not always the case. But nevertheless, okay. This is Infinite Jest. I am seated in an office surrounded by heads and bodies. Okay. Great. Now let's that's been that's only been 3 books so far, plus the honorable mention. Let's do one more maybe. Or at least at this time period, let's do one more, and I may finish the rest of it later and just show you the end result. Going along with another fiction book. I had 2 philosophy books, now I have 2 fiction books. Going along with another fiction, we have Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand. I've read a little bit of this. At the beginning of the year, I was like intending to get it done, like finish the entire book, start to finish, in the first week of the year. This is a pretty long book. This is longer than Being in Nothingness. This is not as long as Infinite. You know what? It might actually be as long as... This book might be as long as Infinite Jest. Yeah, or similarly. This book is 1,070 pages. Okay, it's not quite there, I don't think, with Infinite Jest, but I think some people said it was like 1,200 pages and maybe certain editions or something, but this book is a frickin' behemoth. From what I've read so far, and I've gotten to page 52, this book it's beautiful. It feels like being in a movie, or it feels like there's a movie in front of you. You're not in the movie necessarily, but there is no room around you. There is no screen. There are no like sides of the walls around the screen and a wall behind it. There is just the movie and you. Like there is the pure movie. There is no projector. There's the screen of the movie in whatever dimensions it would be in, and it's just pure right there. And you're there witnessing it. This book is so incredible. This book it's fairly heavy-handed. It's even maybe a little more heavy-handed than I thought it would be. And it is, I have criticisms of Ayn Rand. I think she was a pro baby killing person too, and I have heavy criticisms of that. But Ayn Rand, like David Foster Wallace, like Sartre, like Nietzsche probably, like Camus, like Cormac McCarthy in a certain sense. I think Tolkien might have just been right on the mark in most ways, so probably not like Tolkien, because it seems like he's more generally on the mark, but I guess I don't know that much about Tolkien, but just the sense that I get of him. But these are all authors that I'd probably have huge fucking personal impasses with, but these are all books that seem really incredible, and they're also books that are really like big tasks, whether for how long they are or how like they're written and stuff. Blood Meridian would be the latter. Infinite Jest would be sort of the former and the latter. This is sort of the former and the latter. It's mostly it's the how long they are, but it is kind of written in a very elegant kind of cinematic style. Like reading this book is like watching a movie from a different era where like the movies really felt like they were worth something. Like they really felt like there was just like a movie from the 70s or like from the 50s or from I don't know. It feels like there's a real richness in the movie. Like it feels like there's something there. Maybe it's just the film stock or something. I don't know. But like it feels like there's something there. Like she describes a scene where this hot molten metal is being poured poured out into this huge thing, and it's like this horrible, like sort of dystopian looking like factory setting, but it's also like, she loves the factory shit. Like it's Ayn Rand, Mrs. Libertarian kind of girl, kind of objectivist, kind of like free market person. She loves that stuff, and I'm not against that stuff necessarily, but it's like sort of like a hellish kind of landscape, it seems to me, but this like molten like steel, this white molten steel, because it's a special kind of steel. It's Rearden metal, or it's Rearden steel, and this white molten steel is pouring like velvet or like satin through the air, and it's just like it's so hot that it would like destroy this entire place if it wasn't in the right container, but here it is pouring into the right container. And then off in the distance, Hank Rearden, but we haven't named him yet, a man stands there, just he looks like Don Draper in both size and appearance. He is the man. He's the manly man. He stands there, and a slit of light goes across his eyes, and he looks over, and he says, "It is good." Actually, I don't think Hank Rearden totally looks like Don Draper, because I think he has, like, blonde hair. But he struck me as sort of like a Don Draper type of character, and there's the sort of, like, who is John Galt thing in here. And there is in Mad Men a certain like who is Don Draper storyline kind of thing. So that's interesting. And I'm actually not sure. I think Hank Rearden might be John Galt, but please, if don't comment spoilers for me or for the sake of me or for others. But I think he might be. I'm not going to put spoilers here, but I think he might be supposed to be John Galt, but maybe John Galt is somebody else. But like he's definitely sort of like similar to a Don Draper kind of character, although I guess not really, because he has very like firm morals, and Don Draper doesn't really, like, for all of his like all of his insight and how cool he is and stuff, Don Draper doesn't seem to have like very strict morals. And you might say, well, what a surprise, Matt, Don Draper doesn't have morals. But it's like, like Don Draper walks around as if he has like really high standards, and for like advertising and stuff generally he does, but like in terms of his own like operations, like he really doesn't have much of a standard at all for anything. He's just going around cheating on his wife, doing this, doing that. And I don't think Hank Rearden in this book would be doing stuff like that. I think he is just sort of like a good guy kind of guy. But let's do the first sentence from this. And in any case, this book is written in such a way where it feels like it sort of has a glacial pace, and it feels like it's sort of the size of a glacier, but it's so rich, and many of the scenes are so incredibly beautiful that it's just like, it seems like it's going to be like watching an epic movie reading this book. So let's do the first sentence. Who is John Galt? Okay, now we did 2 fiction books, 2 philosophy books. Get your jokes ready, you teenage atheists. But we've got sort of a merging of narrative and philosophy here. I mean, I suppose actually, and I said that Thus Spoke Zarathustra was similar in style to the New Testament, but the Holy Bible, specifically the English Standard Version here, which I've seen has like a lot of spiritual power to it. Like it really comes across. I have a video somewhere where I was talking about, like, I read the beginning of the New Testament in the English Standard Version edition of it, and it really felt like sort of a psychedelic kind of like an experience where I was really feeling the literary power of this. So like it's an incredible book. Like if you don't have a Bible, I'd suggest maybe getting the English Standard Version. It is a Protestant Bible, so you're missing the extra books that the Catholic Bible has, and I mean, I'm really, like, after watching some Jordan Maxwell presentation stuff on, like, how obvious the imagery is with sun worship. I mean, Jesus is the Son of God, according to the Bible and stuff, or whatever, and God, and he's the S-O-N of God, but then he's all over the place. Just watch one of those, I keep thinking Bill Cooper. Just watch one of those Jordan Maxwell videos. All over the place, you've got sun symbolism. You've got, like, symbolism. Like, truly, you just have sun symbolism all over the place. And particularly in, like, Catholic stuff. And so it's just, it seems to me like if there is, as, Jordan Maxwell said something about, like, the Vatican being a major feature of, like, what goes on in the world. And it seems to me like if there is sort of, like, a major sort of big religious organization in the world that has some kind of like conspiracy sort of connections to it, then the Vatican seems to be the one, you know. So, but then again, you know, there is some good stuff in Christianity and stuff. And you might say, well, Judaism for the Old Testament, and it's like Jordan Maxwell said something like he didn't think that, you know, he thought essentially that the Old Testament in the Holy Bible was essentially like more Christian than Jewish in a certain, or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what he was saying. There are a lot of Jordan Maxwell videos where he's talking about that stuff. But the Bible, it's a fucking slog. This is, you know, it's a pretty difficult fucking book. I mean, if it were just the New Testament and you're looking at like the Gospels, like the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if it were just that, then it's like, okay, you know, that stuff's fairly straightforward. Even though, you know, there's even some really interesting conceptual stuff going on with just like the beginning of the first Gospel, which is one of probably the easier, more straightforward books in the whole Bible. But the genealogy of Jesus Christ, right from the beginning, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And then it gives you 3 paragraphs where they're giving you like 12 or 14 names each of like patriarchs that went down the lineage to lead to Jesus. And I have a video, maybe on this channel, maybe on one of my Rumble channels or something, but I have a video talking about how incredible it was that basically, like, there's something really psychedelic going on. There's something really cool going on just with the, like, what many people might call the boring first chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew. There's something really symbolic going on in the fact that it goes all the way, the genealogy goes all the way from Abraham, and you might say, well, what about all the way from Adam and Eve or just from God? And it's like, well, that's interesting. But think about it this way. The genealogy goes all the way from Abraham to, it seems to go all the way from Abraham to Jesus, but really it goes all the way from Abraham to Joseph, because this is a list of patriarchs. And Joseph was actually just really the stepfather or the surrogate father of Jesus Christ, according to the story, because God was the father of Jesus Christ, as it says here. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Mary, of whom Jesus is born. But I think the text would say that Joseph isn't actually the father of Jesus, as the text says here. Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. So literally, like, Joseph was not the father of Jesus, according to the Bible. And so it does this whole long genealogy, Abraham all the way to Joseph, and then it seems to end with Jesus. But really it ends with Joseph. Because none of these, that's the real hit meaning of the Bible. None of these people were the father of Jesus. Like, you can go all the way down and you might say, Matt, this is total blasphemy. You can go from Abraham all the way down to Joseph. None of them had anything at all to do with Jesus. God was the father of Jesus. It's like a fucking Tim and Eric joke. It's like, we go from Abraham to Jacob to Judah and his brothers to Perez and Zerah, and Perez to Hezron, and Hezron to Ram, and that's just like half or so of the first paragraph. We go down all those names, and you get all the way to the end of it, and it's like, oh yeah, but none of these people were actually the lineage of Jesus, because Jesus came directly from God. And you could say that, in a certain sense, Jesus came from Mary as well, but Jesus did not come from Joseph. So basically, this negates the importance of the entire Old Testament at once. So it's like there's some really interesting things going on with the Bible, and yet it's a real big slog. I mean, let me read part of the beginning of the book of the Old Testament in the English Standard Translation version here. That this is the book that I stopped on. I read Genesis and I read Exodus. Genesis was kind of a slog. Exodus was even more of kind of a slog. And then I got to Leviticus, and this is where I stopped. Although I was reading the King James version, not this version, so maybe I would have gotten through this more easily. Okay. The Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them,
When any one of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. Let's skip to like the 4th chapter of this book of the Bible. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, If anyone sins unintentionally in any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done, or does any one of them, if it is the anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people, then he shall offer for the sin that he has committed a bull from the herd without blemish. Okay, let's go to chapter 16. Tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. But in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place, with a bull from or the herd. You know, it's just like lists of shit. It's just lists of shit. And I think there's probably like a lot of real meaning in a similar way, perhaps like a reading between the lines kind of way to the beginning of the New Testament, where it seemed like part of the meaning was all these fucking patriarchs were meaningless because God is the ultimate patriarch, and they literally had no connection to God's son. So like I imagine there's a lot of like really interesting stuff, and as Jordan Peterson says, you know, the Bible is supposedly like the first hyperlinked document or something. In terms of like all the little notes on the bottom that link to like other passages and stuff like that, or like tell you little definitions and stuff. Like the Bible is a freaking blast. The Bible is like a huge, huge party going all night with all sorts of stuff going on. In Genesis, for example, one of the most hilarious parts is when there was literally like this guy, I think it might have been Jacob, maybe someone else, this patriarch had 2 wives. One of them was the wife he wanted, and one of them was the wife that like he didn't really want, but like he had to get her before he got the other wife, and they were like, and one of them had been infertile, but then suddenly like she had the ability to have children again. So now these wives were like competing to produce children. Like, oh well, now you have to take care of my child. And then the other wife said, well, no, you have to take care of my child. And then they were naming these children different things, and the names all had like, they told you like the names whether in the text or in the footnote, like he was called Harold because his face was red, and Harold means red in whatever. Or like he was called the heel catcher because he grabbed his brother's heel as his brother came out of the womb. Or like it was just like this crazy contest to like have babies, and then like naming these babies all these hilarious things based on like weird little synchronicities of their birth and stuff. Like it is a fucking like it's a blast. But then in Exodus, you know, you get like halfway through Exodus, and suddenly it's just telling you designs for the holy place for like literally the second half of Exodus or something. Maybe even longer, I don't know. But like it's literally like, cut this tablecloth into 4 sections and put it on this part of the candelabra, and then put it on that part of the candelabra, and this part of the candelabra shall match the other side, and this shall be 2 inches wide, and it shall be made of brass. And then they throw in a few words that you don't know what they are, or maybe they're just like different kinds of stuff that you would work with, craft stuff, or different kinds of woodworking metal, or, you know, like you throw this thing that you don't know what it is on top of this thing in exactly this kind of pattern and at this length. And it's just, you know, it's a real fucking slog. Like that's one of the, like I sat there like in a jail cell like reading through that and being like, oh man, I'm almost to Leviticus. And then I got to Leviticus, and it's like, oh man, Leviticus doesn't even have a beginning part where it's not just giving lists of shit to do. Now it's just, and the thing is, I like lists of shit to do in terms of like morality, and in terms of like saying like, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. Like that could be really helpful. That could be very elucidating. But what feels a little more of a slog is them just telling you like, on the first day, the high priest shall come to this temple, and he shall say these words before he sits down, and then he shall turn 3 times in his grave and drink a cup. And then just imagine that for like, you know, 700 more pages. I mean, I don't know how many books of the Old Testament are like that, but it really like, it basically like builds a barricade in front of you and says, yeah, you want to read the fucking Bible, you want to read this book, you got to blast through this shit first. We got pages and pages of this shit, you know. But I mean, nevertheless, I really think that there's literary power here, and I really think that there's, you know, a lot of power here in general, spiritual power. I think this is probably a great book, and whether you're a Christian or you're interested in theology at all or spirituality, it probably would be a good book to read. And so I'd like to someday read the whole thing. And here's the first sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that was. Now, this is actually one that I didn't plan on, but I think I had an idea, like, and put in the fantasy book, and, like, I'm not sure what the fantasy book would have been. So, I think this might be it. Now, this is actually a series that I want to read, but, you know, this book in itself, this is book one, or sort of book one, I think there are prequel books and stuff, but this book in itself is difficult. But this is Gardens of the Moon, of the series that is so difficult that it seems like nobody even really knows exactly how to pronounce it. It's a fantasy land, so it's not like a real like country that it's named after, Malaz, or the city Malaz or something. It's like that's part of the land, so it's the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or I think it's the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or Malazan? No, I think it's the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Mike from Mike's Book Reviews calls it Malazan. I think that's wrong because it's supposed to be like the American Book of the Fallen or the British Book of the Fallen. Like I think the Malazan, like that's the name of a city or something. So it's like the New Yorker Book of the Fallen, like the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's not just like one word Malazan. It's like the Malazan is like a different form of the word Malaz, to say like it is from Malaz. And so I think the pronunciation might have something to do with that if you're pronouncing it correctly here. But right or not, this is quite the book so far. I wouldn't say it's like one of the best books I've ever read so far, but it's definitely like interesting. It even seems like it's not that far removed from some of the other fantasy stuff that I've looked into. Like, you know, the writing, like, compare this to another book that I'd like to read. You could easily replace this series with that. Compare this to the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. That book has, like, really dense, beautiful, sort of almost Blood Meridian type prose. This book, maybe not quite that, like, dense, but, like, similar enough. This book has prose that is more similar to, like, you know, like the prose from the Witcher translation or the prose from the First Law or something. Like, it's just sort of, I don't want to say it's bad or something, or like simple or young adult or anything, but it's sort of, you know, just sort of basic kind of prose, like, you know, regular kind of prose. It doesn't feel like super deep like the Bible or really any of the books that I've mentioned thus far, probably. But even like Atlas Shrugged, like it doesn't feel quite as like substantial as Atlas Shrugged, maybe, in the prose. But what it does have is this real mystique of like, this is like a 10-book series. It's known as like one of the most difficult fantasy series. It has like hundreds of characters apparently, which apparently is true of a lot of fantasy series, but it's like apparently like the second book just like totally has all new characters from the first book. It's like, or most of the characters like in the first book don't even appear in the second book, and it's like in a totally different land of the world. And then like the third book apparently goes back to like some of these characters, and then maybe it goes back to the second book's characters in the fourth, but I don't know. Like, just go for The Greatest Show on Earth if you want to see something like that. If you want to see this, go to Mike's Book Reviews and check out him talking about Malazan, or Malazan, or whatever. Check out him talking about these Steven Erikson books, and just see him over the months and years being like, yep, I still intend to finish Malazan. Yep, I'm still reading it. It's not that I don't like Malazan. It's just, you know, I'm taking a little bit of a break because it's such a slog. It's like, yeah, no, I still want to read Malazan. It's not a DNF. It's not a did not finish or a do not finish kind of thing. I still do want to read this series. And I kind of do too. Now, here's the thing. if I get to the end of this book and I still feel like it sort of just has kind of the aesthetic and kind of the feel of just like any other kind of fantasy book, almost like, just it's there just to be there. It's there just to be a fantasy book. I'm not saying it's like, it sounds kind of damning, but I'm not saying like it's really bad or anything. But if it just feels like sort of like an ordinary kind of thing, if and when I finish this book, then I may not go on to read the rest of the series. But there is something like really, there's sort of something simultaneously that puts me off about these books, like in terms of like me actually saying like I don't think I would vibe with that, and something that like draws me in. And so, like, it's just like, if you can feel the cover of this, like something about the cover and the title, Gardens of the Moon, like I don't feel that attracted to that. But something about like the whole series, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, like something about the whole series does feel really powerful, and I do want to read it. So this is a difficult book, but really a difficult series that I'd like to read. And if it were just this book and nothing else, I don't know if it would really make the list. But as a series, I think maybe it does really qualify for this. So let's read the first sentence here. The stains of rust seemed to map blood seas on the black pocked surface of Mock's vein. All right, so we've got, some fantasy. We've got the Bible. We've got, and by the way, the Bible, that's fantasy too. It's like, but if you watch enough like Jim Rohn and stuff, like he refers to the Bible as being written by the storyteller. And Jim Rohn to me has sort of like, I'm not saying yay or nay on this, but he sort of has like kind of Masonic master vibes to me. Like he sort of feels like kind of a guy who would like put on a robe in another context and like be like some kind of like elder in some kind of wisdom society or something. Like he seems like kind of an occult guy. And so when he talks about the Bible, he always like sort of without fail, he talks about the Bible being presented or written or something by the storyteller. It's always the storyteller. The Bible and the storyteller. And it's like, that seems to me to be kind of maybe a truth drop from Jim Rohn saying like, this is all a story. I'm not telling you that this is actually real, but I am telling you that there's wisdom in there. I'm not sure. But in any case, here we have another sort of theological book, but this is where we get into poetry, and perhaps you might say epic poetry. No, it's not the Divine Comedy. It is Paradise Lost, John Milton. I've read some of this before. Let me say where my bookmark is. In the text of the book, and the poetry does start in this book on page 3. Page 1 is just the title, Paradise Lost, and then, numbered page 3. There's stuff before that, but numbered page 3 has, the poetry beginning. But I got to the beginning of book 4, which is on page 77. And I'd probably start this over again. Probably I would start over most of these books again. Maybe not some of them if I just started reading them more recently, maybe like Atlas Shrugged. But most of these books I'd probably start over again. And this one, I actually really enjoyed it. There was a kid, so far anyway, there was a guy in my one of my college poetry classes who said to me, like, you should really read John Milton. And it's funny because I had a friend, this guy was more of an acquaintance. Like, I thought he was cool, but I didn't, like, spend time with him. But I had a friend from, like, New Jersey who, when I came back from college, he was talking about how he was really getting into Milton. And, like, even his mom said, like, oh, he's always talking about Milton. And it's like, so this guy was getting into Milton, and not just Paradise Lost. He mentioned, like, the Areopagitica or something, which I think might be in this book as well. If not in this book, I think it might be in another Milton book I have. This book has a lot of criticism of Paradise Lost. It has selections from the Bible, selections from Milton's prose. Oh, it does have the Areopagitica. I guess if the Areopagitica is only about like a little less than 30 pages, then it does have it. If not, then it's probably just a part of it. Selections from Milton's prose. There you go. So probably just a selection from it. But this book is cool. This book, it's an epic poem. Now, here's the thing with poetry. Poetry is one of those things, probably similar to like short stories and novels, but to a much like more concentrated point. Poetry is something where even like one of my English teachers said, like literally, not just one of my English teachers, like literally my AP literature teacher in college, or not college, in high school. That's a weird Freudian slip, but the AP literature, and I did get college credits, I think, for that AP literature class, maybe, so I guess it was sort of a college course, technically. It was really free college credits taking that fucking thing, and, you know, maybe I got into the college that I did partly because I took the AP Lit class. I think almost certainly that helped. But this guy, like, he talked about poetry sometimes, and he'd talk about Billy Collins and, like, the poem Thanks by Yusef Komunyakaa, which is a really cool poem. But that's a poem where it's like, thank you for the butterfly that was on the tripwire in the Vietnamese jungle that saved my life, seeing the wire there rather than being like jumping over it, or rather than tripping over it. Like, thank you for the dud hand grenade that was thrown. I'm still falling through its silence. Like, just beautiful fucking stuff. But even this guy who was like telling us about like different poets and stuff, and like had us write poetry, and he even took us to like a poetry conference thing where I saw Tony Hoagland read, and it was actually my first of 2 times seeing Tony Hoagland read in person. And Tony Hoagland died not too long after the second time I saw him read, but not too long anyway, but it was definitely years after that, I think. But I saw him read once in high school and once in college, Tony Hoagland. Now I have all of his collections. I think Tony Hoagland's awesome, but he is, just like David Foster Wallace, he's way too libby for his own good, and he also reveals some of his like non-libbiness in what he talks about, and then yet he reverts to the same like Fox News is bad kind of propaganda. Not that Fox News is good, it's all bullshit, but Fox News is better. Like, literally, I'll say this right now. Fox News is better than the stuff on MSNBC. Like, it's all bullshit, it's all propaganda, but the conservative propaganda is at least closer to being good than the liberal stuff is. And, you know, Tony Hoagland says a lot of stuff that sort of got him in trouble. Like, he has a poem where he basically says, like, you guys couldn't even fucking, like, lick the spit off of John Keats's fucking face. Like, or something like basically it was people talking about like some old poet or older writer or something. I don't think it was John Keats. It might have been the guy who wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover or something. But he's like, you guys couldn't stand in the same room with that author, and yet you're just putting him down because he's some like old dead author or something. Like, fuck you guys. You couldn't fucking serve a plate of gruel to fucking like John Milton or like one of these guys, whoever wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover. And that in itself is sort of like a conservative sentiment, or at least a sentiment of like, no, it's not just all these old dead white authors and they're all bad. It's like, no, like some of these people are actually way better than the garbage that you guys are putting out today, or that you guys pretend to like. But in any case, the AP literature teacher, he had us write, he had us write some poems and stuff, and he had us read them in class. And I actually read a poem in class, and I got like a really good reaction. Like, I think I was seen as sort of an outcast. Like, I was seen as sort of like a kid that like people didn't generally like, but like there was literally like one of the girls from the class like came up to me and was like, do you write poetry, or like something like after that class? And I think this was like a fairly attractive girl who like I had never talked to. I think probably she had never said a word to me, and like I probably had never said a word to her, nor expected to. Just like sort of a level of like, just like, oh, she's over there, she's doing her own thing, I'm over here. Like, it's just like I'm not associated with this person. And like she walked over to me and she said like, oh, like, do you write poetry a lot, or like something like that? And like another kid whom I had actually like hung out with years before, like once, but like he was one of the sports kids, he was one of the cooler kids, but he was also in my AP Lit class and my AP Calculus class. You know, he was pretty smart too. He was awesome. I liked him a lot. But he said something like, he said something like, oh, Matt's a lyricist or something. Like when I went into my AP Calc class after the study hall or something, and lunch after the lit class that morning or something, like in reference to the poem that I read, he's like, oh, like Matt's a lyricist or something. And it's like, okay, like that's really nice. And, I mean, I guess that may not be here nor there, except that like this was a guy who facilitated a class where like, that was more just like maybe talking about my own successes or something. But in any case, this was a guy who like talked about poetry sometimes, and like he actually seemed like sort of a legitimately interested in literature kind of guy. And yet he himself said, I think he himself said, unless it was like a different English teacher, but I think it might have been him. He said something like, you know, if a poem is more than a page and a half, I just don't want to read it. Like it might sound hilarious because like the song J. Alfred, or the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the poem by T.S. Eliot, that's a very readable poem and it's a great poem. And it is like 6 or 7 pages. But like this guy said, like if a poem is like more than a page or a page and a half, or I think he said something like that, then like that's too long. Like I don't want to read it. Like essentially, it's like, you know, a poem should be shorter. And so, you know, even coming from what I'm saying here maybe is even coming from the mouth of an AP Lit professor or a teacher in a college class, I thought to say no, in a high school class that got me college credits. Long poems can be a slog, or long poems can seem like a big hurdle. Long poems can almost seem like, you know, a poem shouldn't be that long. Like a poem is, you know, the format of a poem is sort of more concentrated, and so if a poem is really long, even if it's like a 20-page poem or something, that can feel like a real epic fucking job to get through. And so you have a book like Paradise Lost, or any epic poem, I suppose, where it's like, let's see how many pages it goes. And this isn't even like that long of a book, but for like a poem as a book, it is pretty long. And so it's like, you know, 303 pages. Take out like the title page and the page after that to get to like the first page with verse on it. That's like 301 pages of this book having verse. It's like 301 fucking pages of like, you know, poems or poetry broken up by some paragraphs, like telling you what happened. This is, you know, and like footnotes galore, and like, you know, like it's just poetry, you know, like this is a fucking big thing to like take on. And yet, like, look at this illustration on the cover. Like, it is beautiful. And it is, like, there's real quality here. Like, you can fucking feel it. And also, this is one of the notable books from that time period that actually was A, actually written in English, and then was B, actually written in English that I think doesn't usually have any kind of like extra translation to get it to readable modern English. Like if you go read some original Shakespeare and stuff, if you don't have some of those words like respelled to like more modern shit, you might not even know like what he's saying. If you go back and read like the original version of Beowulf or like, you know, the Canterbury Tales or something, like apparently it's like partially a different fucking language. But it's like this book, this classic of literature, I think it came out in like the 1600s or something. I could check in here maybe, but this classic actually is written in like readable actual English, and it's like the original text of it. It's not somebody's translation of it. It's not somebody like Matthew Ward or somebody saying like, here's a really good translation of The Stranger and like you're really gonna like it, but it's not the original. This is the original. And so, you know, similar to David Foster Wallace saying in the commencement speech that he did, which I actually really like. Some people said, like, this is the worst thing David Foster Wallace ever wrote. I thought that commencement speech was awesome. And I've listened to it so many times. I love it so much, I actually bought the book version of it, and I read through it, and there were some of the parts that he, in the commencement speech audio recording, says that he was skipping because it was a long ceremony, and you can actually read those parts in the fucking book version. So if you really like the commencement speech of This Is Water by David Foster Wallace, then it would be a good thing maybe to check out the book form or the book version. But, you know, as David Foster Wallace said, something like, you know, the conveniences of modern society, like, they have a lot to say for them. Like, you know, there's a lot to say for, like, something, he uses some phrase, like, you know, there's a lot to say for the conveniences of modern society or something. Or, like, there's a lot to say for this or that. But here's why you might want to look at it differently. It's like, there's a lot to say for Paradise Lost. There's a lot to say. I think I'm missing the actual phrase he used, but like there is a lot to say for this book, and I really think that I'm gonna like really have a really great experience reading this book. And anyway, I could see with this, I could do the first sentence that's not verse, but let's just consider like the book itself kind of primarily the book itself is the poetry, and then the prose parts are really just kind of telling you about it. Even the prose parts written by Milton, or seemingly presented as being written by Milton. Nevertheless, let's just do the first. Let's do the first sentence of the poetry. So this may be many lines. I'm just reading until I get to a period. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat, sing heavenly muse that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed. In the beginning, how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. It's sort of like the first sentence of the Bible, like it sort of is, but anyway, there.
Okay, let's see if we can finish this. So the next book rather, is a pretty big one. Big in terms of how large it is. I guess particularly I mean the first section of this, meaning, well, not the preface, although the preface is, I think, kind of part of the text, but, well, I don't know. Particularly, I'm referring to the text part of A Course in Miracles, third version, or third edition, rather, or whatever, combined volume. So this book is incredible. This is one of the most powerful books I've ever read. This, as you can see, my little initials are here. This is another one of the books that I got sent in to me in prison. And I think there was one that I didn't mention. Oh, no, Being in Nothingness I mentioned, and then... oh, yeah, well, that's it for this list, maybe, of books that I got sent to me in prison, but I had this book before then. But A Course in Miracles. I might have thrown it out at some point or given it away, or I don't know what happened to it, actually, but this is a powerhouse of a book, but it's also pretty long. This is a book where the length does play a big part of it, but really, like, not even that big of a part, because, like, for example, the text part of it, it's really not that long. Oh, this actually has separate numberings for each of the particular sections, so maybe it is longer than I thought. So, yeah. Oh, shit. Well, the text of it is 669 pages. That's sort of interesting spiritually or, like, conspiracy-wise. It's like it's just a little more than 666 pages for the text part of it. In this edition, anyway, that's interesting. But this book is just, as Eckhart Tolle says, like, it begins with one of the most powerful statements of all time. This is the introduction, not the preface. I was thinking this might have been what they referred to as the preface. But basically, this course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So those two being the things. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. And then they go back to the, non, verse part of it, or, the non, block quote part of it to say, herein lies the peace of God. It's like, this is serious fucking shit. Okay, so this part is going to be more of an audio continuation of the video that I'm already doing. As, this video probably seems kind of long, but really what it is as long as it is, but it has felt fairly sluggish in itself. This video has sort of felt like kind of the equivalent of reading one of these books in terms of a video. You'll notice that I've put little title cards for each book. I've, even put a title card or two for other sections. I think this is going out to all my peeps in a very nice way. Now, the next book that is on the playlist for this is, as I started to read from A Course in Miracles. Or wait a second.
Well, you know what? I did read the Course in Miracles thing with the, let's see, the the thing from the introduction with nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. That's close enough to the beginning of the book, but that wasn't me reading the first line. If I were to read the first line, it would at least be the beginning of that little introductory page. It wouldn't be that part of it. But anyway, A Course in Miracles is just, I mean, if I were to point to one spiritual book, and I've said something like this before, but if I were to point to one spiritual book that I've gotten both the impact of just being around it and holding it, and also that I've gotten a lot of impact from like reading pretty much any part of it, it would be A Course in Miracles. Like that entire book, it's just, spiritual powerhouse all the way through. It is a spiritual powerhouse. Now, but it's also pretty long. And if you add the extra parts to it, such as the workbook, which is essentially like a whole nother book length project where they're giving you like daily exercises for like a whole regular, not leap years worth of days. That part in itself is pretty incredible. It has all these perceptual exercises. It's more like a book similar to The Presence Process or Discovering Your Soul Signature or Full Catastrophe Living, where it's giving you some kind of spiritual stuff, but it's putting it into a process form. And it's both one of the easiest and one of the hardest of those process books to get through. It's easy because the things that it sort of tells you to do and the reading sections themselves, they don't take very long. However, I think they do sort of associate parts of the text with like the daily exercises from the workbook. So I think to really complete a day, you might have to read a part of the text as well. And so, that's a little more labor intensive than just reading like stuff on like maybe one or a little over one page and then doing like a short perceptual exercise. Like, looking at an object in the room and saying like this cup does not mean anything, or like then you look over and it's like that chair does not mean anything, which is sort of an existentialist item to say whether it means something, because I think Sartre said somewhere like, well, a chair is created for it to carry out a function, like it's created to be a thing to sit on, and so the chair does have a function, but you as like you as consciousness or you as being or whatever, you don't have a function. You exist first and then you do something, whereas the chair wasn't at least made into the form that it is without someone having some kind of game plan generally to set it up to be sit in. So it's like the chair was set up for a reason, but you're there in your infinite freedom without a reason, or without a seeming particular reason. And so here you are, and so then you get back to the Course in Miracles thing, like this cup has no meaning, that chair has no meaning. Sartre might say, well, the chair does have a meaning, and I would actually say Sartre, if he did say that, I'm not sure if he would, but because it might be more about the chronology of the chair being built and stuff. But if he did have some kind of statement about the chair having a meaning in its being built, I think he would still understand the idea of A Course in Miracles, where it's like, these are all just objects. It's like there might have been thought going into the process, or thought swirling around the process of creating this object. There may have been intention here and there, but with the object itself, like right now, it has no meaning. It's just there. It doesn't mean anything. It's similar to the classic question, what is the meaning of life? I remember as a kid, like, I didn't even really understand what the question meant, because it's like, what do you mean the meaning of life? Like really, literally, what does that mean? It's like what life means? Like, what do you mean what life means? Like, life I wouldn't maybe put it in the terms of like life is meaningless so much as like it's like, what is the meaning of a pine cone or something? It's like the pine cone is there. It's not about like a meaning of it. If they phrased it like what is the purpose of life, I think I would have had less difficulty sort of figuring out what they were trying to say. But with what is the meaning of life, it's almost like a Zen koan, because it's like, it kind of self detonates itself. It's like, oh, what is the meaning of life? It's like, what do you mean, what is the meaning of life? Sort of to ask it is kind of to answer it, except in this case, to ask it is to answer it by saying it's an invalid question, or like there's really no answer. Because again, like standing back right now, it's like still, I'm not sure I could describe exactly what you mean by asking what is the meaning of life. It's like maybe you'd say why was life created or something. Or like why did life appear, and like that might be more of a historical perspective or more of like a consequentialist perspective. But even that doesn't really seem like it gets to the point of like the question, what is the meaning of life? But in any case, you look at A Course in Miracles, one of these workbook segments, and it says, they're essentially like there is no meaning. And A Course in Miracles is careful to say, I think probably many times, like this is not, and like the workbook probably says, I think the workbook does say it. It's like this is not predicated on your believing the statements that we're telling you. Like it's like basically we're presenting this to you, and the effect that it's having by reading it is the effect that it's having. And so it's not like you have to buy into this idea or like buy into what we're saying on this page or that page. It's more like, and actually I think they might even specifically say like if you buy into it in some sense, it's actually going to be less effective, and it might also be less effective if you disregard it, or rather if you reject it. But if you don't like take it in some kind of like proactive way, I mean, I guess basically if you don't buy into it or like get attached to it in a certain sense on one hand, or like just avoid it or reject it on the other hand, if you just like read it and let it do whatever it's going to do in terms of like the effect that it's going to have, then that seems to be what the book is going for. And again, that book is powerful. I remember in jail, like doing some of the stuff with like the workbook and like reading into the book itself, and like it's a very interesting book. And one of the most interesting things about it is how pro-Christian it seems to be, because it's supposed to be, in one sense it's very blasphemous, but in another sense it seems to be very pro-Christian, or like some kind of Christian messages, because it's supposed to be basically channeled teachings of Jesus through Helen Schuckman, the supposedly like the transcriber or the author, or however you want to say it. And the book gives you a little like lowdown of like, at the beginning, I think in the preface, it tells you like a lowdown of, what went into creating the book, or what went into, transcribing it from what the woman was hearing, or blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, like in the book somewhere, it says something along the lines of like, if I, Jesus, weren't here as some kind of mediator, and I don't know if it says like I, Jesus, but the book is stated in like a first person narrative, or a first person, like somebody telling you about something, and it's supposed to be Jesus. So essentially the book is saying like, if I weren't here to act as a mediator between God and like the people of earth, or, God and people in general, it would not be really possible for you to reach out to God. Like it wouldn't be possible for you to connect with him. Connect. And so that's a very similar idea to the idea of like particularly Protestant Christianity. And, again, I did have the Protestant Bible here, the ESV, but version of it. But like it's very connected with sort of the idea of like saved by grace, but not just saved by grace, but like saved by grace through Jesus Christ particularly. And that even fits in with some of the stuff St. Paul supposedly has in Corinthians, where he says like, if Jesus didn't die and get resurrected, then our whole, like, everything I'm telling you is BS, basically. Like, it's all meaningless. It has no purpose. It has no anything in it if Jesus didn't die and get resurrected. And then I think he basically, like, gives some, like, Christ alone, salvation through Christ alone type of stuff in the First Corinthians book of the New Testament. Of that and of other things, I would point to St. Paul, and I'd say St. Paul, I've heard St. Paul quietly, or, in not like very prominently, but in like small, in like a particular video I watched on the internet anyway, like somebody was talking about how St. Paul was supposedly the Antichrist. And, I mean, St. Paul does say some things that go directly against things that Jesus says, or at least he says some things that seem to go directly against what he says. So, for example, Jesus says, "Be ye like little children, or ye will not enter the kingdom of heaven." That seems like a pretty solid statement. That seems pretty straightforward. I mean, it might, like, how would I be like little children? Like, should I be as young as they are in terms of age, or like, but no, like, I think generally it's like, essentially, like, look at how little children are operating, and perhaps in more of a generalized spiritual sense, look at how children don't have all this conditioning that you have perhaps taken on, and be more like them. So essentially, it seems to me like more of a phrase of like letting go, like let go of enough stuff so that you are once again being like these little children. Anyway, St. Paul, for his part, and he could be saying this in a different context or something, but I think it is in First Corinthians as well. I did a little little jailhouse presentation of First Corinthians for my little jailhouse Catholic class that we had like once a week, or maybe multiple times a week, I'm not sure. But and one of the guys actually referred to me as Matty Corinthians, because like some of the other ones, my jailhouse presentation of Corinthians, it basically was going like chapter by chapter or something. So like for 16 weeks, or however long it was, maybe it was like multiple chapters, but like for I think more than a month at least, like every week I'd be going and like giving another sort of presentation on what they were saying in Corinthians in jail. And so that was kind of interesting. And the Catholic guy who was doing the class said, like, this will be like a feather in your cap for the judge or something. And as far as I could tell, it didn't do a single thing for me. Like, I don't even know if it was mentioned at all to the judge. And I think I had mentioned it to one or both of my lawyers, but in any case, it didn't seem to do very much for me. The guy apparently like said that he would write me like some kind of letter. Actually, I think he did write me a letter of like affirmation or something. And then I think my second lawyer ended up sort of saying like, this letter doesn't really do anything for you, which is kind of funny. And, like, I don't know. I think maybe putting it in would have been helpful. But in any case, I did a presentation on Corinthians, and in Corinthians, Paul says something like, well, when I was a child, I did childish things, but, now I am a man and I put away childish things. And it's like, that seems to go directly against the sentiment that Jesus had of like, be ye like little children. It seems to be almost like the exact negative image of that statement. It might be, of course, you might say that it's actually, I would say it's actually like, it would be more something like, basically childish in terms of like understanding things with less depth, childish in terms of like being more superficial, being more storybook rather than like getting to the deep roots of like what we're actually talking about spiritually. Like you could say it doesn't really contradict what Jesus said, but it's just sort of an interesting data point. Now here's another interesting data point. Jesus he famously said something like, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, when somebody was like asking him for like tax money, or maybe when somebody was telling him that they were being asked for tax money. And he was like, render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's, which to me suggests, and I think it does it pretty specifically, that suggests that God and state are totally separate. And yet St. Paul, I think, in, of course, the aptly named Romans, St. Paul, I think, says something along the lines of like, the state or the government or whatever it is God's representation, it is God's representation. Here is God's representation here on earth. And it's like, man, what a stark contrast. It's like Jesus is basically, in a certain sense, at least like sort of structurally in that sentence, he seems to be saying God is one thing and the government is another thing. So render unto Caesar's what is Caesar in terms of like giving him tax money, but that has nothing to do with God. And yet here's St. Paul saying something along the lines of what the government does or what the government stands for or what the government asks is what God is.
Okay, so let's go back to video to finish out the Course in Miracles section. So we're going to read the first sentence from the introduction, because it is sort of the beginning of the text version. It's not the preface, it's the introduction to this. So this is A Course in Miracles. All right, so I've got 2 more books, unless I have one more after that. I think it might just be these 2, so let's get through them. And then maybe let's get through them. So first is the Odyssey, particularly the translation by Robert Fagles. I haven't looked too much into the translation thing, but I bought this at, I think I bought this used somewhere, and it was a pretty good price. And it's another epic poem, similar to Paradise Lost, but it's a little more of like a fantasy style poem. Of course, like, the Odyssey by Homer, but it's got like even a fantasy map in the beginning, or I guess that's a real map, Matt. Yeah, well, is it? Oh, it has multiple fantasy maps. I'm just flipping through pages here, but or multiple maps related to the story. So this is more of a fantasy style thing. But look, it just starts. It doesn't have any text telling you about, it probably has an introduction and stuff. Introduction and notes by Bernard Knox, not the translator. But yeah, look, it has this cool little illustration here, and it's just a nice book. Like, it's a nice, the pages are kind of uneven in sort of an artistic way, and the paper quality feels good. But yeah, this is... if you're going to be reading like one epic poem, this or the Iliad would be a good one. You've got Beowulf, you've got Canterbury Tales, you've got Divine Comedy, stuff like that, or the different parts of it. But yeah, I'm interested in reading this. This is probably actually going to be easier going, both in terms of the amount of text and the style of text, than Paradise Lost is. That said, I think Paradise Lost was just over 300 pages or so for the verse part of it, and this appears to be, oh boy, this is longer, but it's also less text on each page, so I think it might meet somewhere in the middle, but it's 400, goes to page 485, but if you'll see here, it starts at page 77, or 75 if you count the title page here. Or, even earlier than that if you count the maps. So it's closer to like 300 something pages, because it goes from 377, from 77 to 485. So it's like it's actually barely that many more pages than Paradise Lost is, and as you might be able to tell, it does seem like there's larger text and thus less text on each page. And this is a classic book. I like how it starts, and, I think people doing their little introductions on YouTube and stuff, I think it might be similar enough to this, even me saying, welcome to Truther Raps, it's similar enough to sing to me, oh muse, kind of thing.
And I'll read the first sentence worth of this, which appears like it might be all one long line or 3 lines. But, I'd like to read this book. This is probably the book I have the least connection to in terms of like interest and like thinking about it. As you might be able to tell from me talking about it here, I'm not saying much, but it's something about it does seem it seems much more doable than Paradise Lost. I'd say this is probably the easiest book on this list, but it's still like it's a poem that's more than 300 pages long. And again, to go back to the AP Lit teacher, he said he didn't want to read a poem more than a page and a half. So I look forward to this. Robert Fagel's winner of the Penn/Ralph Manheim Medal for Translation. I don't know if he won it with this. It seems like he might not have, actually, because then it says, presents us with Homer's best loved and most accessible poem in a stunning new modern verse translation, which sounds like it's after he won the prize. But, it seems like it's a good book. Did the world need one more translation of the Odyssey? Yes, that's what Newsweek apparently said about it, about this one. So, even just having one epic poem under my belt would be probably more than most people in the world, really. And I don't think I have read an epic poem. Another epic poem might be The Bridge by Hart Crane. I don't know if that really counts, but that's a longer work, or a longer work that's sort of around one topic. Similar enough to, like T.S. Eliot. I think that was sort of a response to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, like trying to make something perfect or something. But anyway, sing to me of the man, Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course, once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. There. And now we have the book on the list. I've mentioned it in a video on this channel before, but it was actually a video, I think, that was audio and video. But this book is Critique of Pure Reason. I think it might be a Mandela effect, because I always saw it as, I think I've always seen it as a Critique of Pure Reason, and now it's just Critique of Pure Reason. It could just be this edition, but in looking around online, it seems like everything is now a Critique of Pure Reason without the article before it, so who knows? But I mean, just look at this book. This is a beautiful, I like the Penguin Classics stuff anyway. I have a few of them at least. But this is incredible. This is basically like, and according to the introduction, or a little of it that I read, or maybe stuff that I listened to on YouTube and stuff, this is like the philosophy book. I think Kant said somewhere, maybe it's in here that it says this, I think Kant said somewhere that, oh yeah, here we go. This is the quote that the introduction starts with. I am now in a position to publish a critique of pure reason of, within about 3 months' time. Kant in a letter to Marcus Hertz, February 1772. Since the introduction is written by Kant, I think it is, and since it follows right after Contents, which is, quite a decent, a little bit of a chunk into the book. Here it is, the first sentence. There can be no doubt that all our knowledge begins with experience.